This is the part that I really resonated to today. Leading the customer and putting them first, not the engineers, is, I think, the most AI-proof thing you can do right now.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Mathews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
It's 30 minutes away. I'll be there in 10.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie!
Ian, you son of a bitch. There it is. There's that cough. There's that cough.
Hey, people, sometimes when we hit record, Frank forgets to stop eating, so he's crunching on some peanuts and pretzels as we speak. So, Frank, we are recording a show. This is
food
a
I got from
show.
Food I got from a vending machine, no doubt.
So we, for all the loyal listeners that want to know some behind the scenes inside baseball here, whenever we start, I have to say, Frank, turn off your Outlook. Hey, Frank, turn this on silent. Hey, Frank, do this. They do that. Frank, go to pee. It's like talking to like an 8-year-old. If you go on pee, make sure you go pee so you don't have to get up and quit in the middle. I'm going to have to add to my checklist. Frank, could you stop chewing on those pretzels? We're about to start recording. People will be listening soon.
I have an acidic stomach today, Ian. I've been fighting cold.
Acidic stomach. So that means more pretzels. I need more combos. I got to use some nacho cheese combos.
I need some base.
Frank and I were just talking about Frank is knee deep into the throes of coaching a couple of you've got a T-ball and you've got a coach pitch team. Is that right?
Correct.
And when you start coaching, for those of you that haven't coached youth sports, you're going to have all walks of life as your parents. You're going to have your group of critics, your doubters that wonder how your ass could ever have got into a coaching job, and they'll ask you questions about your lineup and where kids are playing and why isn't my son playing shortstop? And you kind of hope for those because those are at least parents that give a damn.
They're engaged.
Frank has a lot more parents that just don't show up. They're kind of absent. They're not around. They don't want to help. They're not terribly interested. They're not working with their kids outside of it. And, you know, if you gave me a whole team of one or the other, give me the parents that have an opinion on every little thing I do, because at least they're probably putting in some extra effort at home and working with you. You kind of want the doubters because they give a damn.
Yeah, 100%. I did my blood work, and I work with someone who is like a fitness person that looks at my blood to make sure everything's working right, and my doctor. And I was on my doctor and I was asking him a bunch of questions after the blood work came in. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm probably a pain in the ass. He goes, no, you're the opposite of most of my clients. You actually give a shit about your blood work and you're asking me good questions, which leads me to believe that you want to live a long, vigorous life. And because of that, you make yourself a very desirable client to work with, because I want someone who wants to live. That's the whole point of this. So I was like, okay, cool. Yeah. So engage, like, our kids are loud and they're energetic and they're exhausting. And one of these parents said to us at one point, well, it's better than having duds. And it's the truth.
I totally agree with that. And as you coach kids that get older and it gets more competitive, you're going to want the highly engaged parents, even if their opinion clashes with yours. You want to listen to what they have to say, because those kids are going to show up more prepared. They're going to be doing more practice on their own time. They care a lot. And if those parents care enough to ask you those pointed questions that maybe are critical at times, that at least shows some level of engagement that's going to help the kid get better, even if you don't love everything that they said.
No, it's perfect. It's great.
And one of the things that Frank and I were talking about today, it's an old video. It kind of comes and goes every 2 or 3 years. It's from one of Apple's developer conferences back in the late 90s of Steve Jobs handling a question that I think would be pretty fair to say is rather insulting. Not even ambiguously, it is blatantly insulting, right? I mean, kind of the way this engineer asked the question and the way he responds to it is I always love it. And we're going to break it down into a couple of different components. But I'm right now, Frank and I did a episode maybe a couple of years ago just on how to manage your former peers. And I talked about in that episode the 4 different types of people that emerge when you become a manager. And one of them is the doubter. And the doubter is normally really good at what they do, unless you'd have to be an idiot to be an outward doubter if you sucked at what you did. And most new managers get the doubter wrong because they let their ego get in the way and they try to assert themselves over the doubter. They try to argue with the doubter. They try to fight with the doubter instead of just listening and seeing, can I learn from this doubter? Which I think that's something that you and I have been doing this long enough now that we try to learn from them. If you're good, if you suck at your job and you're doubting me, that you're a moron, I'm going to replace you. But if you're good at your job and you're doubting whether I'm going to add any value to you, you probably have some things to share with me that could help me run this business a little bit better. Might be different for you with some of your departments and just how much you're willing to tolerate, but I think doubters are what drive innovation.
So I actually had a different response to this. The person asking the question that we're going to see in a minute is a technical expert. And he asked 2 questions. He asked a very technical question about a software that is now defunct, but it meant something at the time, and people in the audience clapped when he asked the question. So what it led me to believe is it was an important question for people in the audience. And what you're going to see from Jobs, he answers it. That's awesome. That's the opposite of what most politicians do. Most politicians restate something and then answer a completely different question. He answered the damn question. So that's refreshing from that perspective. In addition to that, what Steve Jobs does is he pivots and he goes into the direction set of where he's going to take Apple. He doesn't say that, but that's what you're going to see. But the other thing that I really felt is there was just a misalignment. Jobs is going to be setting a vision and doing certain things, and he's going to talk about those. But this is a technical expert who has a different series of wants, needs, and desires about how he sees the world. And that's a big part of it, right? Like, who's right, the CEO or the guy that's putting the stakes in the ground for the railroad company? They're both probably right, but they have very different viewpoints. One's on the ground and one's in a tower. So you have to kind of understand who's asking the question. And I think for a guy that is known to be not very humble, Jobs was incredibly humble in this moment.
So important to state here, when you think about Apple, most people listening to this are thinking about the iPhone in their pocket. They're thinking about iPads. They're thinking about the Apple Store. They're thinking about the monster
Apple of today.
Monster multi-trillion dollar, $3 trillion organization that mints money off of a series of products that we've come to kind of not be able to live without. In 1997, Apple was a very different company. Apple had just basically their only product was the Macintosh. That was about all they had at the time. And they had just rolled out like a 20th anniversary Macintosh that, do you remember the one that was kind of like see-through and had different colors and you could see the inner workings of it? It was, and it was that version was like a $7,000 computer. Computers were still
Very expensive.
Right.
Yeah.
Even like the cheapest Macintosh back then was several thousand. You could get a laptop for cheaper today from Apple than what you had to pay for those back then. But it was largely.
To put it in perspective for you, just real quick, is funny. So on Monday, I felt like shit. I stayed home from work. I did a bunch of phone calls. And middle of the day, I'm like, I got to go sit on the couch. I'm shivering. So I put a blanket on and I just turned the TV on. And what was on was The Price is Right. There was a laptop. It was a decent laptop. Ian was talking about a $7,000 desktop computer. I thought this was hysterical. Everybody bid on the laptop and they all overbid. Like, it was
all
so
overbid.
They all overbid. It was like you get that deep beep, 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 and it says, all right, you got to start over. It was like $750 for a pretty badass, like for a computer that was more sophisticated than what we had when we went to the moon, is now $750. But keep going.
Yeah. They had laptops and they were brand new. The laptops were brand new in the field and they were largely used for business applications because they were so expensive. Apple's first laptops were PowerBooks, and the only reason I know that is that our engineers had them when I started at GE in 1999, so they were a little bit more expensive, but it was like a big deal for Apple to even have an online store. Forget the App Store, forget a lot of there. Like just being able to buy a computer on a website in 1997 was a big deal. So just kind of level setting at the time, this was very much a desktop, laptop, and operating software kind of, OS kind of a company. And so they are at a developer conference, and a developer conference, it's filled with a bunch of engineers from outside the company who do work for the software that Apple would eventually put into their desktops. And so this guy, to Frank's point, he's an engineer, he's a software engineer. He's probably dedicated his life to this version of software that he feels is being discontinued. And he has a very strong opinion because that's what he's a little bit, Frankie, like some
That's
of
his
the
lane.
programmers today that are very threatened that AI is taking away their job. There's a lot of programmers that dedicated the last 20 years of their life to learning a language that can now be done by a high schooler through AI. And so you can sense this guy is he's feeling a certain way about what he's dedicated his life to, the craft that he's dedicated his craft to. So I'm going to play just the first couple of minutes of this because I want, if you're listening to this, I want you to just notice the way Jobs handles the initial objection and his demeanor and his response, just the first part of it, and then we'll chat about it a little bit.
Before you hit play, I want to say one thing real quick. There was a viral clip that we used, one of ours, that we broke up and shared with a bunch of people. And I've of course cursed, but I was quoting somebody else. And it was, shut your mouth and use your ears, is basically what it comes down to. God bless you with one mouth and two ears for a reason. What I think he really does is he listens, and he does something we'll talk about in a second, really specific when he listens. And I think that sets the right tone.
Mr. Jobs, you're a bright and influential man.
Here it comes.
It's sad and clear that on several counts you've discussed, you don't know what you're talking about. I would like, for example, for you to express in clear terms how, say, Java, in any of its incarnations, addresses the ideas embodied in OpenDoc. And when you're finished with that, perhaps you could tell us what you personally have been doing for the last 7 years.
You know, you can please some of the people some of the time, but one of the hardest things when you're trying to affect change is that people like this gentleman are right in some areas. I'm sure that there are some things OpenDoc does, probably even more that I'm not familiar with, that nothing else out there does. And I'm sure that you can make some demos, maybe a small commercial app that demonstrates those things. The hardest thing is, how does that fit in to a cohesive, larger vision that's going to allow you to sell $8 billion, $10 billion of product a year?
So a lot going on there. I'm gonna start with something that I've seen Jobs do often at these developer conferences. So two things. One, he's willing to take Q&A. He's the CEO of a massive company, and he's willing to let random engineers fire away. it's something you and I just find absolutely endearing and fascinating about Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger when we would go to his Berkshire Hathaway annual meetings, that they wouldn't read one of the 50 questions. So they didn't even have time. And Frank and I would always joke, like, people would say, "Oh, bullshit, they got the questions before," and be like, if you'd see them respond, half the time they're like, did they say China? What did they say? They couldn't even hear half the questions. They would make them repeat it almost every time. They clearly hadn't heard it. But I always found it just, and there would always be two or three people, usually someone who was criticizing an investment they made. Remember the one girl that criticized that they weren't doing enough for the environment? There would be just random stuff would pop in there where someone would insult Warren or Charlie, which, you know, kind of shocking to do in an event like that. And I I think it's incredible when a CEO of a big enough company can put their ego aside and let someone on a front line share unfettered criticism, questions, ask anything and put them on that. That's a real show of confidence for me, that you can get up in front of a group and not prepare and be ready. This guy clearly was not vetted by the PR company that, helped Apple out with or helped Jobs. This is a pretty biting question that he comes through and asks. And the second piece that I'll just say that I love, and I've seen him do this at a lot of these different developer conferences when he gets criticism, not being afraid of a long pause. It is such an art. I was watching on that click. It's over 20 seconds. He says a couple of things, but he just sits and thinks. And what a long pause does after someone says something biting to you. One, it makes them kind of second guess. Should I have said it? Why did I say it? But also, the audience is really leaning in. I know when I first saw this, I lean in. The longer he waits and pauses, the more intrigued I am about what he's going to say in response. And I, I think the pause also does something in that it helps you calm down a little. It gets you into more of a rational response and not an immediate emotional response to, let's be real, that's an insult, right? I would like to hear what you've been doing for 7 years, and why do you think Java could be possibly better than OpenDeck? And, as he's going through that, it's clearly he's not happy with the direction and the thought process of the CEO of Apple. And so that pause lets him think about the best response, but also it kind of gets the room to lean in.
I can only imagine if Trump was in that room, he would have belittled the guy and then spent 15 minutes rambling about something completely unrelated. What instead happened was someone who built a titan of an industry did exactly like Ian talked about. He's willing to stand in front of a crowd. One of my least favorite things about George W. Bush is he used to always answer questions with the word The first word I was asked was always When Obama came in, different politics, just so much more confident in front of a crowd, and he was an incredible orator. There was a very, very contentious time where he went and spoke, Obama, within his first year of presidency to the American Medical Association. It was in June of 2009. And he went in there, and there was this whole thing about insurance, and doctors really had a lot of risk, and they didn't make as much money. But Obama was so well tuned to all the issues that they could ask him incredibly nuanced questions. And he stood in front of an entire room, like 1,000 pissed off people, and he answered the questions. And I don't know if he had good or bad politics, but what I can tell you is I knew he was really smart, and he was somebody who came to the party pretty organized and willing to take difficult questions and answer them head on. And I had respect for that because I just wasn't accustomed to seeing it in my adult life. And I get a similar sense from Jobs. Jobs went on to amazing things with this company. He's revolutionized our worlds. But it starts right there. He did not swing at a pitch in the dirt. He gave him a true answer. And then what we're going to see in a second is how he pivots. And I love that part.
Yeah, Obama was just gifted at this, at being able to just listen and craft it and That's how you get a bill through that's as disastrously bad as Obamacare. Like, because he was gifted. It wasn't the bill was a disaster. It
Yeah.
still is. But he was pretty gifted at kind of getting his points across and getting it through. And I'll say, if we're going to use presidents here, I respected that Obama would do that. Also, whether Trump handles it or not, one thing I respect about the guy, he takes questions all day. He is not afraid to take questions. You don't have to love his answers, but he's not afraid of the questions, which, again, similar to Jobs, that shows a high degree of confidence to me versus the guy who was in there before Biden, hid in a basement for 4 years, wouldn't take any questions that weren't scripted, perfect, because he couldn't answer them. He didn't know the answers. He didn't have a leader that will take questions, that's not afraid to get out of the corporate office, get out of the headquarters and go out and talk to the front line. That shows confidence. You don't have to have every answer. You might just say, you know what, you just first I'm hearing of this. I'm going to take some notes. I have no idea. I'll get back to you on that. I think it shows a ton of confidence to come do it.
So what I love about this, now that we're talking about this kind of in the back and forth, one of my favorite things that pops up in my social media feeds is old videos of President Reagan. And Reagan always used some kind of a joke to start. And Jobs used a little bit of a laugh line to kind of set the tone. You know, the problem with gentlemen like this is sometimes they're right. Like, that's a perfect way to kind of just diffuse everything with a laugh, reset the tone, and then he took on the question, which is a tough skill.
It's a tough skill. A couple of things he does with humor. Before the guy can get into the punchline, he says, "Here it comes." Right? Just gets the room laughing, like Jobs knows he's about to get picked on.
And he holds up the stool and like a shield.
Stool, like if you weren't watching it, he holds his stool up like he's trying to hold the guy back a little bit. But I like that if in a debate, and the reason why politics is so polarizing today, about the only one on either side, Frankie, who is doing this, Democrat or Republican, is Fetterman, the guy that wears a frickin' hoodie everywhere. He is the only politician on either side who's like, I think they kind of got a point there. No one does that. No, absolutely. Like, if you watch the presidential addresses now, no one stands up no matter what, even if it's something that we could both get behind that just makes sense for all Americans. So I like in any debate, you concede some point. So he says, this guy's got a point, and I understand what he's saying. And I think when you just dig in and always say the other side's 100% wrong and you try to steer them and you try to go a different direction, it would have got the room to dig in. But by him saying, this guy makes some points here, but then he quickly pivots. And what he pivots to is, you have a perspective and I understand it. Let me share a perspective from a guy who's being tasked with selling $8 to $10 billion in product.
Which is kind of a pimp move, right? And that's the next point I wrote down, is this goes from being cute engineering to there's a different level if you're tasked with selling 10 billion a year of product. And let me show you what the major leagues looks like, fella.
And it takes him, it's a 5-minute response. He doesn't get to the second part of the insulting question of what have you been doing for 7 years for 4.5 minutes. He acts like he didn't even hear it. And one thing that I took away from this, when I watched the way Jobs handled it, having read a lot about Jobs, and he's, very impulsive personality. He is big ego. He is responsive. One of his employees could not have done this to him in a meeting. So let's just say that. Jobs was on his best behavior on a stage in front of a bunch of third-party developers. But
and at a point in his career where he needed to eat a little crow because he was coming back in.
This is 97. He's just starting back with the company. The company is teetering. They brought him back because they were desperate. They're not making money. this is not the powerhouse Apple by any stretch.
That's right.
But the cool part about how he handled it, it's almost as if you were talking to a language model, an AI. You know how like sometimes when you insult, like you yell at Siri, or my kids will do this. They'll be like, Alexa, you suck, because they ask Alexa 3 times and she keeps getting it wrong. Alexa doesn't take that personal. Alexa says, I'm sorry, I'm missing the mark for you. Would you like me to try again? That's a little bit the way he handles this. He handles it almost like a computer trying to give the best answer, and not a human being who just got his feelings hurt on a stage in front of a bunch of people. So I like that. I like a very rational response to an insult in a group in front of a, where your status has been taken down a step. You got anything else on how he responded?
Hit play, brother, and share the sound.
You've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. And I've made this mistake probably more than anybody else in this room. And I've got the scar tissue to prove it. And I know that it's the case. And as we have tried to come up with a strategy and a vision for Apple, it started with what incredible benefits can we give to the customer? Where can we take the customer? Not starting with, let's sit down with the engineers and figure out what awesome technology we have, and then how are we going to market that? And I think that's the right path to take. I remember with the laser writer, we built the world's first small laser printers, and there was awesome technology in that box. We had the first Canon cheap laser printing engine in the world, in the United States here at Apple. We had a very wonderful printer controller that we designed. We had Adobe's PostScript software in there. We had Apple Talk in there. Just awesome technology in the box. And I remember seeing the first printout come out of it, and just picking it up and looking at it and thinking, we can sell this. Because you don't have to know anything about what's in that box. All we have to do is hold this up and go, do you want this? And if you can remember back to 1984, before laser printers, it was pretty startling to see that. People went, whoa, yes. And that's where Apple's got to get back to. And, I'm sorry that OpenDoc's a casualty along the way. And I readily admit there are many things in life that I don't have the faintest idea what I'm talking about. So I apologize for that too. But there's a whole lot of people working super, super hard right now at Apple. Avi, John, Garino, Fred. I mean, the whole team is working, burning the midnight oil, trying to, and people, hundreds of people below them, to execute on some of these things, and they're doing their best.
So you get the point of that second part there. So he starts with deflection, he starts with pivoting, and then he goes into a much broader viewpoint than the gentleman who was insulting him in the first place. And I think one thing that both of us love is his line about starting with the customer and working your way back.
It's funny, I've seen 4 versions of this video. There was the stuff in there about the stylus that I hadn't seen. It's a different version. I took a bunch of notes. He talked about scar tissue. He publicly forced out of his own company. Everybody in the room can understand that. And he said, I probably have the most in the room. And I think everybody can say, yeah, publicly. And how would they react to that? Probably not as well as he has coming back.
Fired from the company that he founded.
Yes, which is tough to do. And then brought back as the lifeline to save it. And they had less than 30 days of cash on hand when they brought him in, which was really bad. Where can we take the customer? He says that. He says it's the right path I think. And then he talks about he doesn't have the faintest idea. So there's three separate things he says there. I'm going to start with the right path, I think, and not the faintest idea. That also admits that, hey, I'm human. I don't know. I could be wrong. But when he gets into the thing about the cool thing in 1984 about what the product had, you see a glimmer of where Apple's going. You really get a good sense of, oh, this guy can build magic and lightning in his hands, and he can convey it. You can kind of get a little bit of a sense of that, where that goes. This is the part that I really resonated to today. Leading the customer and putting them first, not the engineers, is, I think, the most AI proof thing you can do right now. I talked about this morning, and one of the reasons that I wanted to show this video is we just had a really good month. And the reason we had a really good month is because we prioritized the customer. We sold our most expensive house we've ever sold. We sold it before it was on the MLS because people came to us and asked for a couple of things and they wanted to make a deal. And we prioritized meeting with them, having that conversation, and we got a deal closed literally before the grass was installed. Pretty cool. We put 33 houses under contract, which is a big number for us because people are all kind of nervous and scared out there with what's going on in the marketplace. And we were just a place where we could come and be trusted to listen and have, open conversation about what can we do for you. And I think it's the wave of the future is belly to belly with people, being in sales and listening and offering support and solutions. And it's a big part of what I think will pivot forward with a great deal of success.
Starting with the customer. I could think of so many different examples here. Frank and I just raised $3.5 million for a real estate syndication. And it started with one structure. If you go back and listen to our podcast we did 6 months ago on it, when we were just literally pencil on paper trying to figure out how this thing's going to go. And as I started to get through the raise and Frank started to get through it and we listened to some of the investors, they had some opinions on terms. And some of the ones we were listening to the most were the ones saying, I'm not investing. I'm going to pass on this. And the follow-up question there is why? What's it missing? What didn't you need more of? And as we went even mid-raise, we were learning what people wanted, what they were worried about, what they were looking for, and our terms changed. Now, they didn't change dramatically, but they changed, and we adapted, and we tried to figure it out because we don't want to do one deal and never do a deal with these people again. We want them to be excited about the deal. We want them to do 10 deals with us over the next 20 years. So we adapted, we listened, and we changed. I find it's the same, Frankie, with Keep car alarms. Before we sold one, the only feedback we had were engineers. And when he says, I don't like to start with a bunch of engineers saying, what's all this cool stuff we have? Let's go apply it. I like to start with the customer. We didn't have a lot of customers. So we were asking people, what would you like out of a car alarm? We did a fair bit of that, but our product didn't really start to improve until people installed these things in their cars and they started parking and the alarm started going off at the wrong time, or the Bluetooth didn't work, or we would find out that some people left their keys close to their garage, which meant that the alarm was always off because it felt like they were in it. We learned by these use cases, by talking. And when you say guerrilla warfare, it is the CTO calling customers and helping them do an install and taking notes and saying, oh, that's not clear enough when we do our software. I got to upgrade that. Our product didn't get better until we really started to interact with people who were using it, not asking about what their dream state was, but people actually using it and taking that feedback and incorporating it into the design of the product. You are so right. That is not something that AI can replace, getting that direct feedback from end users and what their experience is.
Every AI video you see, if you want to basically AI proof yourself, number one is sales. Like if you ask Gemini a question and it's just obvious you're talking to a computer, like that is the number one thing you can do. And what Steve Jobs is the best at is emoting a response from a customer. When he gets his confidence back in about 10 years, he famously says, I don't ask the customer anything, because the customer doesn't know what they want. You know, if you ask somebody what they want, it would say, do you want an automobile? And say, no, I want a faster horse. So he gets over that. But at this moment, this is the perfect time for him to kind of show you, like, no, we've got to really just put this in place. I think this is fascinating. I just thought of this. Think about when the Apple Store launched, when they were selling music for 99 cents a piece. It was during that era when everybody was pirating music. And Jobs' big push was most people want to be honest, but the system isn't built for honest people. The system's built for crooks. So why don't we give honest people a way to actually put music in their pocket legally? That's all we need to do. And if you notice, Napster and all those things, they got sued as well, but they all went out of business because you got a better device and you had more access and you felt better about it. I don't want to save $12 and maybe go to jail. Like, I want to pay for this and I'm happy to, but I want to carry it with me. And that's the whole the process of prioritizing the customer.
Take this podcast. The first 50 we did, we were all over the board. We would just talk about whatever was on our mind that day. And to an extent, we still do some of that. But over time, we got better data. Frank and I have an analytic dashboard with Apple. We can see what percentage of each episode that you listen to, how many people make it all the way to the end, how many people click on it at all, how many listens does each get. We have our top 20 list of all time, and we see certain categories that just get resonated, that get forwarded to more people, that get listened to, that get shared more. Frank and I get direct feedback, text messages from people that listen to it saying they liked this one, liked that one. We listen also. We try to pay attention to what do people like and what are they're listening to, and we try to give them more of what they're asking for.
People from the South really particularly love when I curse, so I've tried to put more of that in there.
It's not just the cursing. It's I think it's the context of that particular curse that made it awkward to send to a diverse group of people. Let's just say that.
I hate saying it a second time.
Not so much your potty mouth. It was the context of that joke that was pretty goddamn hilarious. I must admit. But I don't know. I feel like all executives can deal with some of that humble pie of listening to the customer. But I love his caveat of, I've got to do things that make sense for an $8 to $10 billion a year company. So I'm not going to make every one of your ideas aren't going to be great because they might just be good for you. We got to do things that fit into the context of running a large organization, which is, if you want to know what my job is, that's what my job is. My job is to grow this thing and to not let Apple fail a second time. I have to make decisions that move the needle and not things that are down at some software level that you're talking to me about.
All right, let's cross our fingers that we got the video to play. Let's do it.
That's it. That's all that's left.
The clip I have has a little bit more.
I mean, there's like 30 seconds left of it.
Got it. You're calling it a day.
I'm kind of calling it a day. There's not that much at the end that's that exciting. It's just him glazing a few of his executives and saying they're all working hard and we need to support them. And there's not that much left in the clip.
Fair enough. I
think we've unloaded the clip on this clip, Frank. I think we've really beat this thing to death. This Steve Jobs leadership lesson is what I think.
What I think we definitely don't want to do is have to have our editor put a third splice together.
Yeah, if you're listening to this, you have no idea how highly edited this stupid 30-minute video is because I screwed up the screen share multiple times. I had to replay it. So Alex, our beloved assistant who puts together all of our editing, is working overtime and earning all of her hours this week because I completely jacked up the there's gonna be like 4 files she's gonna have to put together.
And for our loyal listeners, the good news is you're about an hour deep, but Ian and I's timer only says 30 minutes because he hit stop on recording.
There's no doubt. So
for loyal listeners, before Ian gets into the pitch, if you do want some show notes, please put out, Alex, can you please put up the show notes? I know that's it's desperately missing.
Show notes are incredibly important. So if you liked this episode, if you're new to it, share it with your friends. Give us a 5-star review on Apple with some comments. We will send you a premium cotton t-shirt with our logo on it. Frankie, it's been good hanging out with you, buddy.
It was a good one. I'm glad that video popped up. We talk about the customer. We've been talking a lot about sales lately, and I think prioritizing the customer and sales is a lot about what this was about. So thematically, we're sticking with it.
And if you want even more of Frank's thoughts on this, check out his Facebook post on this. Give him a follow while you're at it. He's a prolific writer now on Facebook, most of which is his and not AI.
Most.
See you, Frank.
See you, buddy.